Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today I feel like we're honored because we have with us a gentleman who is a Nobel Prize winner, a noted author. His name is Dr. Burton Richter. He's written a new book, which we want to talk about, called Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, Climate Change and Energy in the 21st Century, published by Cambridge University Press. To acquaint you a little bit more with the author, I'm going to read some stuff the publisher sent out.
Not too long, I hope.
No, it says some nice things about you. Dr. Burton Richter was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1976. Someone told me you were very young when you did that.
I was 45. It's very young for a Nobel laureate. You usually don't get it till 60 or 70.
Ooh. And then they go on later to say you served on many U.S. and international review committees on climate change and energy issues. And that's a point that you bring up over and over again in the book, that in order to pursue climate change and understand what's going on and what's possible, things have to be reviewed. And that's where all the tough stuff comes in. Past Loeb lecturer at Harvard and Astor lecturer at Oxford, Dr. Richter now serves on the board of directors for Scientists and Engineers for America and continues his energy work down at Stanford University. So thanks for coming by.
My pleasure, Jim.
You know, in Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, you write about the political context. If people want to do something in this area, like any other scientific area, in our country at least, there's always a political context. And just today, writing in the San Francisco Chronicle, John Carroll writes about that kind of political context. He talks about something that I understand you are familiar with. Recently, a panel of 250 scientists wrote a letter to the magazine Science expressing these same ideas. That is, that they were disturbed about the recent climate change and evolution debates in how ignorance has been elevated to knowledge and how scientists have been assaulted for holding generally accepted theories. What the hell is going on here?
Well, the climate change is very, it excites passions, let me say, because it requires you to change what you're doing. And when you change what you're doing, there are going to be certain economic parties that win and certain economic parties that lose, and people get all upset. The problem for the general public, for whom I wrote this book, this is not a wonky science book. Right? It was written for the general public.
Correct.
Is that they are sandwiched in between the groups I call deniers, the ones who say that this is all a big fake, and the exaggerators, the ones who say the world is going to end tomorrow unless we all put our sweaters on and stop driving our cars.
And beyond that, do exactly what we say are the solutions.
Exactly. Now, what's happened now is that as a result of this thing called Climategate, these emails that got leaked, the deniers, or some of the deniers, have gotten a lot more vocal. And there have been actual threats made by people in our Congress that we're going to see about prosecuting you and all sorts of stuff. So this letter is saying this is getting out of hand. This is a science issue. If you want to argue with the science, that's fine. But if you want to threaten us with legal actions or being sued for pursuing this science, that's not fine at all. So the point of this letter, it's accompanied by an editorial in the same issue of the magazine, which makes the same point. But I think the letter does it better. The way the letter concludes, or at least his conclusion that he quotes here, is very powerful. We can ignore the science and hide our heads in the sand and hope we are lucky, or we can act in the public interest to reduce the threat of global climate change quickly and substantively. The good news is that smart and effective actions are possible, but delay must not be an option. Absolutely right. I completely agree with him. There are smart and simple things to be done, but some of them are kind of hard to do, and some of the best are really being ignored in favor of some things which are not nearly so good.
Mm. Well, maybe that's always the case.
Maybe that's always the case.
Well, I believe that your book, Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, is a good example of what we call acting in the public interest.
I hope so.
Which is, what the last part of that letter said. And, I mean, you have a strong belief in what the state of the question is.
What I've tried to do in this book is for the general public to tell the story. What do we know about climate change? How do we know it? What are our uncertainties? How long is it going to take to resolve those uncertainties? Why should we start doing something even though there are uncertainties? What we can do, the good things and the not-so-good things, and what we should do in policy, the good things and the not-so-good things. It's not an easy problem. It's a problem which eventually has to be handled by the whole world. It can't be just handled by the industrialized nations. And that's tough, to bring in nations which are trying to improve their standard of living. It is true that your economic well-being, per capita GNP, is strongly coupled to the economy and to the amount of energy you use. So the poor want to get richer. The rich don't want to get poorer. And so this says that the amount of energy people use is going to get bigger. How are we going to get it bigger while at the same time we reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions? There are ways to do that.
Clearly, Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, Climate Change and Energy in the 21st Century is an important and serious book. But in my opinion, that doesn't mean it can't have a humorous moment or two. One such coming up when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, Climate Change and Energy in the 21st Century by Dr. Burton Richter. That's the title. That's the book we're working with today. It's published by Cambridge University Press. And a gentleman by the name of David Victor had some good things to say about your book, some of which are a smart and careful survey of the problem and a dose of sobriety on real solutions. Rare in the field, the book is both well-informed and accessible and written in elegant prose.
Oh, that's very nice.
Did you take him out to dinner and then worked out that?
Well, I couldn't do that until after I got it. I owe him a dinner
you
now.
owe him a dinner now. This is a book about very serious issues, and for the most part, it's quite serious. But there is a thing on page 21 where you talk about something called geoengineering.
Oh.
There is beginning to be talk, you say, of an easy way out of global warming called geoengineering, where something new is done to cancel the effect of increasing greenhouse gas. The advocates want to introduce another big effect on the climate that no one fully understands to counteract the temperature increase from greenhouse gases that we also do not fully understand, even after 50 years of intense work. To some of my friends who think we should begin work on geoengineering, I have said that it would be unwise because large-scale technical intervention in the climate system can have large-scale unintended consequences. I really said they're out of their minds.
You should have seen what it was like before my wife made me tone it down.
However, later on, you have some calmer things to say about geoengineering.
The problem with geoengineering, I think, is laid out right there. We do not fully understand it, and there isn't enough work done on it. What's a big complication about predicting what happens when we will add more greenhouse gases? It's very complicated because if I do one thing, I trigger other effects that may make the thing I did first worse or not so bad. That's what people have been working on for 50 years. And when you're talking about geoengineering, people have been talking about it seriously only for a few years, and I have not seen the serious work on these things that I call feedback effects. Let me give you an example of one. Okay, CO2, carbon dioxide, is a greenhouse gas. I add more, the temperature goes up. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas, too. I increase the temperature, and the amount of water vapor goes up, just like a pot sitting on your stove evaporates more when the temperature goes up. So that sends the temperature up more. But more water vapor makes more clouds, and clouds reflect incoming sunlight back into space, and that makes the temperature go down. So now I got this complicated thing. I add more greenhouse gas. Does the temperature go up, or does the temperature go down? Do the clouds outweigh the greenhouse effects or not? It's a very complicated story. The oddest one is that if you raise the temperature a little bit, more snow will fall in Antarctica. And that's because more water vapor. Now it's really cold down there. And it will snow
Better
more.
Be cold.
And so that's an odd effect. Now, what are the odd effects in geoengineering? They haven't even begun to do anything about them. And I think it is more than unwise. It's damn near criminal to try large-scale experiments until you do a lot more work.
The technique that's used in the predicting process that you write about is called perturbation analysis, a lovely phrase. And it's the starting point is the world as it is. The calculations has us adding gases, greenhouse gases are added to the atmosphere. And then across a long period of time, we try to project what temperatures will be. Now, one of the things you mention in going through this system is that there are also from time to time natural phenomena that the researcher has to take into consideration, like volcanic eruptions. We just had one. Now, you kind of poo-pooed the influence of volcanic eruptions.
No, I didn't mean to poo-poo the influence of volcanic eruptions. First of all, I have to correct you. I call it perturbation analysis. They don't call it that.
Oh, well, they should adopt it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
After paying you a royalty.
The thing about volcanic eruptions is that the stuff falls out of the atmosphere relatively rapidly. You look at carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has a lifetime in the atmosphere of hundreds of years. The particles, hundreds of years.
Hundreds.
The particles from things like this erupting volcano have a lifetime of months. So, yes, it has an effect on the climate, and that effect is not going to last very long before it goes away, and the world will be like it would have been if that volcano never erupted. The effects can be very big volcanoes like Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines had a quite measurable effect worldwide. I don't know how big this effect of the Iceland thing is going to be, but it's going to go away in a short time.
Okay. Now, then in the next section of the book, when you look at energy, you get into what we talked about in the first segment, the relationship of energy and wealth. And there's also in here something I wrote down as a physicist's lament. Your ideas clashing, I guess, with some of the other scientists. We have dumped greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and failed to understand that the atmosphere cannot digest it all without changing the economy as well as the ecology of the world. That's an interesting observation.
Yes, and it's unfortunately true. People actually knew at the end of 1800s that if you increase the amount of carbon dioxide, the temperature is going to go up. The thing they didn't understand was how long it would take. They actually calculated at the rate they were adding it back then, it would take 1,000 years to double CO2.
Ooh.
At the present rate, it's going to take 100 years.
Wow.
The problem was population has boomed, and with the booming population, people live longer, The economies are bigger, and we're dumping the stuff in much faster.
Getting a pretty good idea about climate change? See some problems? Wondering what can be done? Just stay tuned.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast, Beyond Smoke and Mirrors. Climate Change and Energy in the 21st Century by Burton Richter is the book we've been talking about. And Paul Brest, who's the president, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, says in part about the book, written by a Nobel Prize-winning physicist with no interest other than making the world habitable for his great-grandchildren. This eminently readable book covers the gamut of issues from basic climate science and economics to the policies and technologies necessary to mitigate global warming. And one of the things that you wanted to do in this book is make it accessible. And at the end of the book, there's something you call a coda. And relative to that accessibility, I'd like you to read a little bit from that coda section.
Okay. I hope you'll take a few things away from this book. The greenhouse effect is real. We're changing. The atmosphere in the world is heating up. The science is still evolving, and how bad things might become is still uncertain. Inaction is certain to have serious consequences. The longer we delay starting to deal with climate change, the harder dealing with the problem will be. The problem is emission of greenhouse gases, and the goal is to reduce them. The world does not have to run only on windmills and solar cells. We can mitigate the damage, but we have to act on a worldwide scale. The richer countries have to develop the technologies that all can use. It will be hard to develop sensible national policies and even harder to develop sensible international ones, but we must try. If we do nothing, it's our grandchildren who will begin to see the worst effects of climate change, and it's our grandchildren for whom we should be working.
Question: how does one develop a technology, let's say in the United States, and I want to develop a technology that's going to be usable both to people in the United States and to people out there in just developing countries?
First thing you have to recognize is that we don't have any idea what the technologies of 50 to 100 years from now are going to be like. Just think back 50 or 100 years and think of what we had then and what we have now. We have things we can do now that can have a profound effect, and we ought to be doing them, and we, in fact, instead are putting our emphasis on things that have small effects and are very difficult to do. My favorite example, which gets some of the green people very angry with me, is the California Million Solar Roof Project. If we do that, we're going to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases by a certain amount. I could reduce the emissions by twice as much for 10% of the cost by converting the one big coal-fired power plant to natural gas. I can do that now. There is no subsidy for doing that, but there's a big subsidy for putting solar things up. So let's get on with the big things. The biggest things are energy efficiency and start with a conversion of coal-fired plants to natural gas, develop windmills, develop solar cells, make them affordable. We're only at the beginning of our work on those sorts of things and other things that are just beginning to come out of the laboratories. But do the big things, catch the low-hanging fruit, and subsidize the development of the things that will come in 50 years from now that we don't know how to make work now.
To which I would add, do the things that are best to solve the problem, even though they're not sexy politically.
And even though they're not perfect, if I substitute natural gas for coal, natural gas emits carbon dioxide, but for equal energy output, A modern gas plant emits 1/3 of the greenhouse gases that a coal plant does. What's the matter with eliminating 2/3 of it now and worrying about eliminating the last third 50 years from now?
Nothing that I can see. One of the other things you talk about is stop mandating losers instead of winners.
Yes. I wish that our Congress would say what's to be done instead of how to do it. Corn-based ethanol is a loser. Every analysis that includes the effect of land use changes says that as far as greenhouse gases go, corn ethanol emits more greenhouse gas than gasoline. When you take into account,
that's hard to believe.
Well, when you take into account producing the fertilizer, spreading it out, running the tractors, harvesting it, trucking to the plant, running the plant, all the rest of that, we give huge subsidies to corn-based ethanol. Why? Well, people are after the Corn Belt votes, and it's a great subsidy for agribusiness. And I wouldn't want to imply that campaign contributions have anything to do with that. I wouldn't say anything like that.
From agribusiness? Come on. Oh, I'm going to have to get you out of here. It's been great talking to you about what is a very, very important book and very, very accessible. The book is called Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, Climate Change and Energy in the 21st Century. The author is the very charming Dr. Burton Richter. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.